What if I told you democracy is designed to fail? This isn't new, it's not a mistake, it's not bad luck, this is what happens, every single time. And 2,400 years ago, one man saw it coming. Athens, the birthplace of democracy. A system where the people ruled, where every citizen had a voice. It was supposed to be freedom, equality, progress. But one man disagreed, Socrates. He didn't just question democracy, he called it dangerous. He said it was a system built on a fatal flaw, and for that they killed him. So what did he know that we don't? Socrates was given a choice: admit he was wrong, or drink poison. He chose the poison. But before he died, he left a warning. A warning about democracy, about power, about why the system we trust is built to collapse. And if we don't listen, we're next. The city of Athens stood at the height of its power. White marble buildings gleamed under the Mediterranean sun. The agora buzzed with merchants, thinkers, and citizens debating the issues of the day. This was the birthplace of democracy, a radical idea that gave every freeborn Athenian man a voice in government. Athens didn't have elected leaders like we do today. Instead, any citizen could speak in the assembly, where laws were voted on directly. Every year, 500 men were chosen by lottery to serve on the ruling council. There were no professional politicians, no experts, just ordinary people making decisions that shaped the city's future. Socrates walked these streets daily, observing how the system worked. He saw speakers rise before the assembly, swaying crowds with passionate speeches rather than facts. He noticed how easily people were convinced by smooth talkers who told them what they wanted to hear. The most persuasive speakers, not the wisest, gained influence. One day, Socrates watched as a politician convinced the assembly to launch a risky military campaign. The man spoke with confidence, appealing to Athenian pride rather than strategy. The crowd cheered, voting overwhelmingly in favor. The campaign ended in disaster, costing lives and resources. Yet when the same politician later proposed another war, the people supported him again. This troubled Socrates. He began questioning citizens in the marketplace, not to lecture them, but to expose gaps in their thinking. When a general claimed to understand courage, Socrates asked simple questions that revealed the man had never truly examined his beliefs. When a politician spoke about justice, Socrates showed how his definition fell apart under scrutiny. The more Socrates questioned, the more he realized most people didn't truly understand the concepts they voted on. They followed emotions, not reason. They believed what felt right rather than what was true. And worst of all, they resented anyone who pointed this out. Powerful figures started noticing Socrates' influence. Young men from wealthy families followed him, learning to question everything. This made established leaders nervous. If people thought too deeply, they might stop obeying so easily. Then came the crisis. After losing a major war, Athens' democracy briefly fell to a brutal oligarchy. When democracy was restored, the city was paranoid about threats to its system. 3 citizens, a poet, a politician, and a craftsman, accused Socrates of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. At his trial, Socrates didn't beg for mercy. He explained that his questioning made Athens stronger by pushing people to think critically. The jury of 500 citizens voted. 280 said guilty, 220 said innocent. When asked to propose his punishment, Socrates suggested Athens should reward him as a public benefactor. This angered the jury. They voted again, this time overwhelmingly for death. In his prison cell, Socrates had chances to escape. His friends bribed the guards, but he refused, arguing that obeying laws, even unfair ones, mattered more than his life. When the time came, he drank the poison calmly, surrounded by grieving students. With his last words, Socrates warned about what happens when societies value popularity over truth. Athens celebrated its freedom of speech, yet executed a man for asking uncomfortable questions. The democracy meant to empower citizens had killed its wisest thinker. This wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable result of a system where truth lost to persuasion, where wisdom lost to numbers. Socrates saw the flaw at democracy's core and died proving his point. The courtroom was packed. 500 Athenian citizens sat in judgment, their faces turned toward the old man standing before them. Socrates, now 70 years old, faced 3 accusations: corrupting the youth, disrespecting the city's gods, and introducing new deities. The first accuser, Miletus, stepped forward. "This man," he declared, pointing at Socrates, "teaches the young to question everything, our traditions, our leaders, even our religion. He makes the weaker argument appear stronger and turns sons against their fathers." Socrates listened calmly. When his turn came to speak, he didn't beg for mercy or hire a professional speechwriter as was common. Instead, he did what he always did: he asked questions. "Miletus," he began, "you say I corrupt the youth. Tell me, who improves them?" "The laws," Miletus replied. "But who knows the laws? Surely the judges and assembly members." "Of course." "Then by your reasoning, every Athenian improves the youth except me?" the crowd murmured. Socrates continued, "If I corrupt them, do they become better or worse?" "Worse." "Does anyone want to be harmed by those around them?" "No." "Then why would I intentionally make my companions worse, risking harm to myself?" The logic was sound, but logic wasn't what the jury wanted to hear. Athens had just survived 2 traumatic events, a devastating plague and the brutal rule of the 30 tyrants. People craved stability, not questions. Socrates' defense made things worse. He compared himself to a gadfly stinging a lazy horse, the horse being Athens. "A city without examination," he warned, "isn't worth living in." The jury voted. 280 hands rose for guilty, 220 for innocent. When asked to propose his punishment, Socrates suggested something outrageous. "I should be fed at public expense," he said, "like Olympic champions. My service to Athens has been greater than any athlete's." The jury, insulted, voted again. This time, even more hands rose for death. 30 days later, Socrates sat in his prison cell. His friends had bribed the guards for an escape route, but he refused. "If laws can be ignored when inconvenient," he reasoned, "how can any society function?" When the executioner brought the poison, a cup of hemlock, Socrates took it without hesitation. His students wept, but he remained composed. The real philosopher, he told them, spends life preparing for death. As the poison spread, his legs grew heavy. He lay down. Suddenly, he sat up one last time. "Crito," he said to his closest friend, "we owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget to pay the debt." These cryptic last words have puzzled scholars for centuries. Asclepius was the god of healing. Some think Socrates meant death was the cure for life's ills. Others believe it was his final jab at Athens, implying the city needed healing from its own sickness. That sickness was democracy's fatal flaw, the rule of opinion over truth. Socrates had shown how easily crowds could be manipulated, how truth lost to rhetoric. Athens proved his point by killing the one man who exposed this weakness. The story spread. Plato, Socrates' student, would later write that until philosophers became kings or kings philosophized, cities would never have peace. It was a radical idea, that wisdom, not popularity, should guide nations. 24 centuries later, we still grapple with this problem. Every election cycle, every viral misinformation campaign, every political scandal echoes Socrates' trial. The question remains, can democracy survive truth-tellers, or must it silence them to survive? Socrates' death wasn't just an execution, it was democracy's first great contradiction, and we've been living with its consequences ever since. The sun beat down on the Pnyx, the hill where Athenian citizens gathered to vote. Hundreds of men stood shoulder to shoulder, listening as speaker after speaker made their case. Socrates watched from the edge of the crowd, observing the patterns he'd seen countless times before. Athenian democracy had 3 fundamental problems. The first was the rule of the crowd. When decisions are made by majority vote, the most persuasive argument wins, not necessarily the wisest. Socrates saw how easily people were swayed by emotional appeals rather than facts. A skilled speaker could whip the assembly into a frenzy about invading Sicily one day, then convince them it was a terrible idea the next, all using the same facts arranged differently. This wasn't ancient history. Modern elections show the same pattern. Campaign ads don't present balanced arguments. They trigger anger or fear. Social media algorithms promote content that generates outrage, not understanding. The mob Socrates warned about now exists digitally, with viral hashtags replacing the raised hands of Athenian voters. The mechanism has changed, but the psychology remains identical. The second flaw concerned leadership. In Athens, anyone could speak before the assembly. The most effective orators rose to power, regardless of their actual knowledge. Socrates famously compared this to choosing a ship's captain by popular vote, rather than selecting someone who understood navigation. History proved him right. Time after time, democracies elevated charismatic figures who promised easy solutions. Alcibiades, the golden boy of Athenian politics, convinced the city to launch the disastrous Sicilian expedition, then defected to Sparta when it failed. Modern politics continues this tradition, where telegenic candidates with simple slogans often defeat less polished experts. The same quality that makes someone good at winning elections, the ability to tell people what they want to hear, often makes them poor at actual governance. The third and most dangerous flaw was short-term thinking. Athenian voters consistently supported policies that brought immediate benefits while ignoring long-term consequences. They voted themselves generous public payments from the city's treasury, leaving Athens financially vulnerable. They approved aggressive military campaigns that brought temporary glory but eventual defeat. This pattern repeats endlessly. Modern governments rack up debt to fund popular programs, kicking the bill to future generations. Voters support candidates who promise tax cuts today, ignoring the infrastructure decay that will follow. Environmental policies take backseat to economic growth, despite the mounting evidence of climate change. The democratic time horizon rarely extends beyond the next election cycle. Socrates saw these flaws as inherent to the system itself. Democracy, by its very nature, rewards those who can manipulate public opinion rather than those who understand complex issues. It incentivizes leaders to focus on visible, short-term wins rather than difficult, long-term solutions. And because these tendencies are baked into how democracy functions, no procedural tweaks can fully eliminate them. Plato, Socrates' student, took these observations further. In The Republic, he described democracy's inevitable decay into tyranny. When people grow disillusioned with chaotic, ineffective government, they become willing to sacrifice freedom for stability. A strongman emerges, promising to cut through the mess, first as a populist, then as a dictator. History offers countless examples. The Roman Republic gave way to emperors. Weimar Germany elected Hitler. Modern democracies flirt with authoritarian leaders who promise to drain the swamp. The pattern persists because the underlying dynamics Socrates identified remain unchanged. The uncomfortable truth is that democracy's greatest strength, giving power to the people, contains the seeds of its potential downfall. When the average voter lacks time or expertise to understand complex issues, when emotional appeals outweigh reasoned debate, when short-term thinking overrides long-term planning, the system becomes vulnerable to those who would exploit its weaknesses. This wasn't theoretical for Socrates. He'd watched Athens oscillate between democracy and oligarchy, each transition bloodier than the last. He'd seen how easily democratic institutions could be manipulated, how quickly public opinion could turn violent. His execution proved his point more powerfully than any argument. A democratic city voting to kill its wisest citizen for asking uncomfortable questions. The challenge remains. How can societies benefit from collective decision-making while guarding against its inherent risks? How can we value popular input without succumbing to mob rule? These questions haunted Socrates as he drank the hemlock, and they continue to haunt every democracy today. The trial wasn't just about one man's fate. It was the first clear warning about a system we're still struggling to make work 24 centuries later. Perhaps the most Socratic response is to keep questioning, to examine our assumptions about government, to challenge easy answers, to recognize democracy not as an endpoint, but as an ongoing experiment. The alternative is repeating Athens' mistakes while expecting different results, something Socrates might call the definition of foolishness. After witnessing his teacher's execution, Plato left Athens disillusioned. He traveled for years before returning to establish the academy, where he developed a radical alternative to democracy. His solution came in the form of philosopher kings, rulers trained from birth in logic, ethics, and governance. The idea seemed absurd then and still shocks today. Why would placing philosophers in charge solve anything? Plato's reasoning was straightforward. Just as you wouldn't let passengers vote on how to steer a ship during a storm, you shouldn't let uninformed citizens decide complex matters of state. The ship's crew follows the captain's orders because he knows navigation. Similarly, society should follow those who truly understand justice, truth, and good governance. Plato envisioned a rigorous selection process. Potential rulers would be identified young and put through decades of testing. They'd study mathematics to sharpen their reasoning, dialectic to uncover truth, and ethics to develop moral character. Only after 50 years of preparation would the most capable individuals assume leadership roles. Crucially, they wouldn't rule for power or wealth. Their education would instill a sense of duty to serve. Modern politics makes Plato's point for him. Consider how we select leaders today. Electoral campaigns test a candidate's ability to fundraise and deliver soundbites, not their understanding of philosophy or economics. Debates reward quick comebacks rather than deep knowledge. Voters choose based on party affiliation or charisma rather than policy expertise. The results speak for themselves. Governments worldwide struggle with corruption, short-term thinking, and incompetent leadership. Plato anticipated another problem: specialization. In any complex society, we accept that certain roles require extensive training. No one suggests choosing brain surgeons by popular vote or letting amateurs design bridges. Yet we assume anyone can competently govern a nation without similar preparation. This contradiction baffled Plato. If we demand expertise for everything else, why not for leadership itself? The philosopher-king model addressed democracy's core weaknesses. Unlike elected officials who must please voters to stay in power, philosopher rulers would make decisions based on reason rather than popularity. They wouldn't sacrifice long-term stability for short-term gains. Their training would help them resist corruption and demagoguery. Most importantly, they'd understand that good governance isn't about implementing what people want, but determining what they actually need. History offers glimpses of this idea working. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor-philosopher, ruled with remarkable wisdom during turbulent times. China's imperial examination system, while flawed, at least attempted to select administrators based on merit rather than birth. Modern technocracies like Singapore show how expert-led governance can achieve remarkable results. Plato's solution raises obvious objections. Who selects the philosopher kings? What prevents them from becoming tyrants? His answer was the education system itself. The decades-long training would weed out the power-hungry and incompetent. The remaining rulers would view governance as an unwanted duty rather than a prize. The deeper question remains: is popular rule fundamentally incompatible with competent governance? Can democratic systems be redesigned to prioritize wisdom over popularity? Plato's answer was no. He believed the masses would always prefer sweet lies to bitter truths. His cave allegory illustrated this perfectly. Prisoners chained in darkness would reject anyone trying to free them, preferring familiar shadows to harsh sunlight. Modern experiments with deliberative democracy suggest partial alternatives. Citizens' assemblies that carefully study issues before voting often reach wiser decisions than general electorates. Jury systems demonstrate how ordinary people can weigh evidence responsibly when properly guided. Perhaps the middle path combines democratic participation with Platonic wisdom, letting the people set broad directions while experts handle implementation. Plato's Republic wasn't meant as a literal blueprint, but as a thought experiment. By showing what ideal governance might require, he highlighted how far actual systems fall short. The enduring value of his solution lies not in its practicality, but in its challenge to examine our assumptions about power and knowledge. 24 centuries later, we still grapple with his central insight, that good government requires more than procedures and participation. It demands wisdom. Whether through philosopher kings, improved institutions, or better civic education, the essential problem remains unchanged. Until societies find ways to elevate reason over rhetoric and truth over tribalism, Plato's critique will continue to haunt every political system claiming to serve the common good. The ultimate test isn't whether we accept his solution, but whether we can devise better alternatives that address the same fundamental flaws he identified. On this question, the jury of history is still out. The scene has changed, but the patterns remain. Where ancient Athenians gathered in the agora to shout down speakers they disagreed with, modern citizens gather on digital platforms to amplify or silence voices with clicks and shares. The mechanisms of persuasion have evolved from speeches to algorithms, but the underlying dynamics are exactly what Socrates observed centuries ago. Social media platforms function as the new Athenian assembly, with likes and retweets serving as digital votes. A viral tweet can launch a career or end one. A trending hashtag can force policy changes or corporate apologies. The crowd still rules, but now it's measured in engagement metrics rather than raised hands. Just as skilled orators once swayed Athenian juries with emotional appeals, today's influencers shape public opinion through carefully crafted content designed to trigger reactions. Consider how ideas spread online. Content that provokes strong emotions, especially outrage, travels farthest and fastest. Complex arguments get reduced to slogans. Nuance disappears in the race for attention. Socrates warned about this exact phenomenon when he described how demagogues simplified difficult truths to win popular support. Today's version might use memes instead of speeches, but the effect is the same. Reason loses to emotion. Cancel culture mirrors ancient Athenian ostracism, where citizens could vote to exile anyone deemed threatening to the state. The same impulse to punish dissent operates today through online shaming and deplatforming. The tools have changed. Instead of writing names on pottery shards, we leave one-star reviews or report accounts. But the psychological mechanism remains identical. Both systems allow groups to enforce conformity by threatening exclusion. Political campaigns now optimize for viral moments rather than substantive debate. Candidates measure success by social media metrics as much as poll numbers. Speechwriters have been replaced by teams analyzing which phrases will generate the most shares. This is exactly what Socrates feared: governance reduced to a competition for applause rather than a search for truth. Even the structure of online discourse recreates ancient problems. Twitter threads resemble the rhetorical trap Socrates faced, where getting quoted out of context could be as dangerous as making an unpopular argument in the assembly. The ratio, when replies outweigh likes, serves as a modern version of the crowd turning against a speaker. Internet arguments follow the same circular pattern Socrates exposed through his questioning, just at digital speed. The business models behind these platforms make matters worse. Attention economies reward controversy over truth. Algorithms promote what keeps users engaged, not what informs them. This creates the same information environment Socrates critiqued, where persuasive falsehoods spread faster than complicated truths and the most skilled manipulators rise to prominence. There's an important difference, though. Ancient Athenians at least had to face each other in person. The physical assembly forced some accountability. Speakers stood before their fellow citizens, seeing the immediate consequences of their words. Digital anonymity removes even this minimal check on behavior, allowing people to provoke outrage without facing the human impact. Socrates' solution was constant questioning, exposing contradictions to reveal deeper truths. Modern platforms actively discourage this approach. Threaded comments prioritize snappy comebacks over thoughtful dialogue. Character limits prevent nuanced explanations. The very architecture of social media makes Socratic questioning nearly impossible, favoring quick reactions over careful examination. Yet some patterns have improved. Fact-checking systems, while imperfect, attempt to counter misinformation. Some platforms now label disputed claims. These resemble the Athenian practice of having official rememberers to keep speakers honest, though with mixed success. The core challenge persists: how to balance open discourse with quality control when scale works against truth. The most troubling parallel is how both systems handle dissent. Just as Athens killed Socrates for questioning democracy, modern mobs attempt to silence unpopular thinkers through harassment or deplatforming. The justification changes. Spreading hate replaces corrupting youth. But the impulse to suppress challenging ideas remains constant across millennia. Perhaps the key lesson is that human nature doesn't change with technology. Give people power to influence others, and they'll use the most effective tools available, whether rhetorical tricks in ancient Athens or viral tactics online. The medium evolves, but the underlying psychology stays the same. This raises urgent questions. If Socrates saw these patterns emerging in simple face-to-face democracy, what would he say about our algorithm-amplified version? Can any system based on popular engagement avoid these pitfalls? Or are we doomed to keep rediscovering why the wisest Athenian feared giving crowds ultimate power? The answers matter because the stakes have grown. Where ancient mobs could only exile individuals, modern digital crowds can destroy livelihoods. Where Athenian democracy affected one city, today's online dynamics influence global politics. Socrates' trial was a warning we're still failing to heed, that systems valuing popularity over wisdom eventually undermine themselves. Recognition is the first step. Seeing our current situation as part of this ancient pattern helps explain why political discourse feels increasingly broken. The problems aren't new. They're baked into how groups make decisions. The solution likely requires what Socrates advocated, cultivating citizens who value truth over tribal loyalty, who question their own assumptions, and who resist the easy allure of crowd approval. Whether we can achieve this at scale remains the defining challenge of our digital age. The alternative is continuing down the path Athens took, where critical thinking becomes dangerous, honest inquiry gets punished, and societies gradually lose their capacity for self-correction. History shows how that story ends. The question is whether we'll write a different ending this time. The story repeats itself with alarming consistency throughout history. Democratic systems, designed to give power to the people, often become the very tools used to dismantle democracy itself. This paradox was something Socrates foresaw when he warned about the dangers of mob rule and unqualified leadership. The pattern is clear. Charismatic figures rise through democratic means, gain popular support, and then systematically remove the safeguards that brought them to power. Consider the Weimar Republic in Germany. After World War I, Germany established one of the most progressive democratic constitutions of its time. It had proportional representation, extensive civil liberties, and protections for minority rights. Yet within 15 years, Adolf Hitler became chancellor through entirely legal means. He used democratic processes to gain power, then immediately began dismantling those same processes. The Enabling Act of 1933, passed by a democratically elected Reichstag, effectively ended German democracy. The people voted for their own oppression. This wasn't an isolated case. In Venezuela, Hugo Chavez won free elections in 1998, promising to help the poor. Once in office, he rewrote the constitution, packed the courts, and marginalized opposition. By the time of his death, Venezuela's democracy existed in name only. The same playbook has been used by Recep Erdogan in Turkey, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and countless others. They all followed similar steps: win elections fairly, then change the rules to stay in power indefinitely. Modern populists have refined this strategy. They campaign against the very institutions that enable democracy, attacking the press as fake news, dismissing courts as political, and portraying civil servants as deep state operatives. These tactics work because they tap into legitimate frustrations while offering dangerously simple solutions. When people feel ignored by complex systems, they become willing to support leaders who promise to smash those systems entirely. The process typically begins with economic anxiety or national humiliation. In 1930s Germany, it was hyperinflation and war reparations. Today, it might be job losses from globalization or cultural changes from immigration. The would-be strongman positions himself as the only one who can fix these problems, portraying all opposition as enemies of the people. His supporters start viewing democratic norms as obstacles rather than protections. Social media accelerates this process. Where Hitler needed radio and mass rallies, today's authoritarians can micro-target supporters with customized messages. Algorithms ensure people see only information that reinforces their existing views, creating parallel realities where facts no longer matter. The result is a population primed to accept increasingly extreme measures, convinced they're saving the nation from imagined threats. The erosion happens gradually. First come attacks on independent media, then pressure on judiciary systems, then changes to electoral laws. Each step is justified as necessary to combat some crisis. By the time citizens realize what's happening, the institutions that could stop the slide no longer function. What makes this particularly troubling is how democratic it all appears. These leaders hold elections. They just ensure the elections become increasingly unfair. They allow opposition, but make sure it can't effectively compete. They maintain the trappings of democracy while hollowing out its substance. Socrates saw this coming. He understood that democracy's greatest weakness is its inability to protect itself from those who would exploit its openness. When all opinions are considered equal, when expertise is dismissed as elitism, when emotion consistently defeats reason, democracy becomes vulnerable to those who know how to manipulate these tendencies. The solution isn't abandoning democracy, but improving it. Strong institutions, educated citizens, protected minority rights. These are the safeguards against democratic backsliding. But they require constant maintenance and vigilance. The alternative is watching history repeat its darkest chapters, with each generation believing it's too sophisticated to fall for the same old tricks. The uncomfortable truth is that democracy contains the seeds of its own destruction. The same qualities that make it fair and inclusive, openness to change, respect for popular will, tolerance of dissent, can be weaponized by those seeking to end it. Recognizing this paradox is the first step toward preventing it. Socrates drank his hemlock to prove this point. His death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was democracy's first great warning sign. The question is whether we'll keep ignoring it. Socrates' final days revealed his proposed solution to democracy's flaws. While awaiting execution, he sketched out reforms that might prevent future tragedies like his own. His ideas were radical then, and remain controversial today. The central question: should everyone really have equal political power, regardless of knowledge or wisdom? The philosopher suggested two fundamental changes. First, voters should demonstrate basic understanding of issues before participating. Imagine a voting system where citizens had to pass a simple test on a proposed law's contents before casting ballots. Not literacy tests used for discrimination, but genuine comprehension checks. Would you support a policy you couldn't adequately explain? Second, Socrates advocated mandatory philosophy education from childhood. Not abstract theorizing, but practical training in critical thinking, logic, and ethical reasoning. His method of relentless questioning wasn't meant to confuse. It trained minds to examine assumptions and spot flawed arguments. In today's terms, it would be media literacy, cognitive bias training, and logical analysis combined. Modern democracies have experimented with versions of these ideas. Australia requires citizens to vote, but also provides detailed, neutral information packets about candidates and issues. Singapore's education system emphasizes critical thinking and civic knowledge. Some countries have deliberative democracy panels where randomly selected citizens study issues deeply before making recommendations. The results are telling. When people understand policies better, they make different choices. Citizens' assemblies on climate change consistently propose more aggressive action than general populations. Informed voters tend to support more nuanced, long-term solutions over simplistic slogans. Knowledge changes political behavior. But implementing Socratic reforms faces obvious challenges. Who designs the tests? What counts as sufficient knowledge? Wouldn't such systems inevitably exclude marginalized groups? These objections mirror those raised in Athens, that gatekeeping political participation undermines democracy's core principle of equality. Yet our current system has its own exclusions. Complex legislation gets reduced to partisan branding. Voters with limited time or resources struggle to evaluate policies. The information-rich dominate debates while others get left behind. Perhaps the real question isn't whether to filter participation, but how to ensure the filtering is fair and constructive. Philosophy education presents fewer dilemmas. Teaching children to question thoughtfully, recognize biases, and evaluate evidence harms no one. These skills don't dictate what to think, but how to think. They're the intellectual equivalent of teaching hygiene, basic mental cleanliness against the pollution of bad arguments. The internet age makes Socratic education more urgent than ever. Ancient Athenians at least had to listen to opposing views in the assembly before voting. Today's social media lets people exist in ideological bubbles where their assumptions go unchallenged. Without tools to question effectively, citizens become prey for demagogues and algorithms alike. Imagine an alternative timeline where Athens adopted Socrates' proposals. Voting required understanding the issues at hand. Schools taught dialectical reasoning alongside reading and math. Leaders emerged from rigorous meritocratic processes rather than popularity contests. Would democracy have flourished differently? Would philosophy kings have proven better than philosopher kings? We'll never know. But we can test elements of this vision today. Local communities could pilot deliberative democracy projects. Schools could expand philosophy and critical thinking curricula. Media organizations could develop engagement metrics that reward depth over outrage. The experiment is already happening in fragments. Wikipedia's consensus model demonstrates collaborative truth-seeking. Effective altruism groups apply philosophical reasoning to real-world problems. Certain online forums maintain surprisingly high-quality discussions through careful moderation. These pockets show that better civic discourse is possible. Socrates' ultimate lesson wasn't about specific reforms, but about the necessity of examination. Just as he questioned Athenian norms, we must question our own. Which democratic practices still serve their purpose? Which could be improved? What trade-offs between equality and quality are we willing to accept? His trial presented Athens with a choice: change or eliminate the questioner. They chose the latter, and their democracy deteriorated within generations. Our choice remains open. We can dismiss uncomfortable questions as elitist or disruptive, or we can embrace them as essential to democratic health. The hemlock didn't kill Socrates' ideas. It made them immortal. Now they challenge us across millennia. Can we build systems that value wisdom alongside equality? Can we create democracies less vulnerable to their own weaknesses? The answers will determine whether our systems endure or join Athens in the history books. Your turn. What reforms would you propose? How would you test voter knowledge fairly? What philosophical concepts should everyone learn? The discussion continues, not in an Athenian prison, but in the global agora we've built together. The only wrong response is silence. Smash like if you see the problem. Comment. Wake up if you love words of wisdom. Thank you for stopping by.